Tron put a new light on video games when it hit theaters in 1982. While most people were still just getting used to computers at all, this film took them inside of one. The special effects to enter this world were unlike anything else at the time. Tron was also one of the first films that portrayed video games, and it gave people a glimpse of where they were headed.
Tron was this odd validation that the computer stuff, that there was more to it. I think that when I first started getting exposed to computers, it was kind of boring. Like, you'd see all this neat stuff in movies, but back then you got to a computer and it was just very text-based. So it was kind of and Tron just sort of kind of validated my belief as a kid that there was something cool about computers that we just weren't quite getting.
The concept in 1982 of like going into a computer was kind of crazy, and computer animation back then was pretty mind-blowing. So even though when you look at it now, the story is kind of quaint. I mean, it was almost kind of like, as far as our eye candy goes, like Avatar, but back then the story's kind of simplistic. But you look at it back then, that was a major step. You're like, wait, you can go in the machine, and you see like the de-resing and light cycles. It was really kind of mind-blowing at the time.
I remember Tron being one of the early movies that sort of had video games but off to one side, just like they were a natural part of life, which is kind of what they are now. It was very progressive. I mean, I think that's the one thing that people don't often consider, is Tron was very progressive in its representation of the way games and computers are going to be kind of incorporated into society. It hit the video game kids, especially people like me that were growing up, because I remember seeing that and just being like, wow. But I also remember very, very distinctly going to the movies with my parents and nobody understanding what in the hell was going on, and it was like, well, that was weird.
Though the film didn't really catch on with the older movie-going public, the games caught on very well with the younger generation. The idea for the film came when writer-director Steven Lisberger saw the game Pong for the first time, so it was only natural that video games played a large part in the success of Tron.
The weird thing about Tron was that, you had this big cinematic experience, and coupled with this kind of, video game experience, which at the same time was still very, very rudimentary. I mean, I played the Atari 2600 back in its day, and that was, was better than that. But at the same time, it was kind of weird that, you could, see this film which had this huge, at that time, very polished effects, and then you go play the game and it's like beep, beep, blop, blop.
I remember just being really jazzed about the movie and then going to check out the games, and it was like, oh.
But I mean, it was still a really fun game.
Really, for me, the game was where it was at. I mean, the light cycle's right there. That was so much fun.
The local convenience store had the Tron video game in it, and I just remember that the handle, it was just really crazy. And the fact that it had a bunch of different games in it. You could play the light cycle game.
The spider thing and the cone thing was the kind of thing that kind of pissed me off, because you had the light cycles and you had the tanks, and they were clearly their own defined cool games, right? But then you had the spider and the cone thing. It was kind of like, working your way into kind of the same thing. But I do remember being like terribly disappointed that it didn't have any form of discs in that game. And then obviously one day I walked into the arcade and fell in absolute love with discs of Tron.
The other stuff, it didn't quite catch the action and excitement that you were getting in the films, which was kind of the standard, right? These days, I think folks are a little bit luckier because you have moments where a movie game kind of captures something about the film and you're like, okay, this is cool. Back then you had to use your imagination a whole lot.
I think what it really helped do was kind of spark your imagination of like, wow, so what we're seeing on screen is actually happening there in the game on a very small scale.
The games really stood out to a lot of kids, and it brought more people to the film. Though initially the games were more successful than the film, Tron gained more popularity over time. Now with the new film, video game, and TV series all in the works, this classic has more going on for it than when it was released 28 years ago.
One thing, even though Tron wasn't the biggest commercial hit when it came out, it's kind of attained that kind of, cult sci-fi status.
It was a very kind of forward-looking film, very forward-thinking, not only in some of the ideas behind it, but also in the very simple stuff, the very subtle stuff of people just accepted that games were cool and they were part of your life. Same thing with computers.
If you really think about 82, there just wasn't like a computer in every home.
Computers touch pretty much every aspect of what we do. And depending on how techy you are, you have additional kind of reliances on them.
I think, it's just simply the culture evolved to be more recognizable of the elements that are in Tron and to, obviously appreciate them more.